Hello and welcome to the podcast. This is Ron's Amazing Stories, where we play tales to take you away from today. On the podcast today, we're going to do something that we have never done before.
No way.
Well, at least to this degree. We have a total of 7 stories, all from you guys.
Wow!
I know, it's a scary thought. We have everything from Bigfoot to time slips. We have a ghost at a museum, a cryptid who hitchhikes, and we even head to Yosemite National Park.
Please, sir, I want some more.
Yes, you can. What show would be complete without a shadow?
I would say none.
So we started all off with our only non-listener tale in the form of a 5-minute mystery.
Another 5-minute mystery.
This 5-minute mystery is being brought to you by very loud noises. They can be quite loud and at times quite annoying. But if you need a loud noise to cover a crime, for example, you can get them everywhere. So get yours today.
Homicide Bureau, Sergeant Timmons speaking.
Sergeant, this is Ken Forbes of the Lawson Forge Machinery Company.
Yes?
You better send one of your men out here to our factory right away.
Accident?
Yeah, worse than that. It's about a young ex-convict we have working here. He just murdered Mr. Lawson.
Hello? Are you Mr. Forbes? What? I say, are you the Mr. Forbes that called police? Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes, I'm Forbes. It's an extremely rush order I'm working on. I couldn't afford to let it wait.
I understand, yes.
If you'll just follow me, Inspector. Mr. Lawson's in his office over here, officer. Just like I found him after Joseph shot him. There's the body.
Shot through the head, huh? This the gun?
Yes, Lawson's own gun.
A pretty small gun for a man to have. Usually you only find these in a woman's purse. Didn't you say this Joseph was an ex-convict, Mr. Forbes?
That's right, officer. I warned Lawson about hiring someone with a police record, but he ignored me.
Why? Well, where is this Joseph? Did he get away?
I have him locked in the washroom here so he couldn't run away. Here, come on out.
Well, haven't you anything to say, Joseph?
What's the use? What good would it do me to say I didn't do it? Who'd believe me, an ex-con?
Why'd you do it?
I didn't do it. I was working on the milling machine, and Mr. Forbes knows it.
Officer, I heard Lawson giving Joseph the devil just before this happened. He'd been in the office for...
That's a lie.
It's not a lie. You had been snooping. I saw you going through the checking accounts 2 days ago,
Mr. Lawson asked me to help him audit the accounts.
That's a poor alibi. Ask you. Why wouldn't he have his own partner help him on the audit? You were just snooping. He probably caught you this afternoon, and you, knowing where Lawson kept his gun, got it and shot him.
Forbes, what were you doing all the time the squabble was going on?
I was operating that chain of automatic punch presses over there in the corner. As I told you when you came in, it's a rush order.
And how did you know about this?
Well, I heard Lawson giving Joseph here a good lacing. Joseph seemed pretty sullen. Then all of a sudden, I heard a shot. I ran into the office and found Lawson slumped back in his chair, blood running from his temples.
I didn't do it, officer. Just because I was set up once for some childish prank, you can't accuse me of murder.
I'm not accusing you, Joseph. But I am arresting Mr. Forbes for the murder of his partner.
What clue did the officer uncover that turned the finger of guilt on Mr. Forbes? We'll find out in one moment. But first...
Okay, this one really has me stumped. How could the officer know what was or...
What did you say?
I say, how could he have heard... Oh. How could he have not heard the gun or the gunshot? This 5-minute mystery is being brought to you by Very Loud Noises. Now back to our story.
And now, back to the homicide officer and the solution.
Forbes, you said you were operating those punch presses when you heard Lawson arguing with Joseph. Then you heard the shot.
I did.
This gun being so small makes very little noise, yet you say you heard it over there in the corner with all those punch presses going. Forbes, you couldn't have heard a shot because just a few minutes ago, you couldn't hear me for all the noise, and I was shouting right into your ears. No, Forbes, your ears aren't that good, and neither is your alibi.
Well, there you have it. Very loud noises saved an innocent man and brought justice for all. If you want your very own loud noise, they are available everywhere. So get yours today. This 5-minute mystery was brought to you by Very Loud Noises, LLC, making better use of noise every day. Well, similar to last week, I have, yet again, been challenged to read an email on the show. Here's what Scott had to say. Hi, Ron. Similar to a prior listener, I dare you to read this on the air. Your show format is exceptionally unique, and I find it oh so satisfying. I look forward to Thursday afternoons when I leave work early to drive to Charleston, South Carolina to pick up my 4-year-old son from preschool. Ron's Amazing Stories accompanies me every Thursday on these trips. I have fallen behind in listening to your podcast over the summer, but now I can look forward to Thursday afternoons once again now that school is starting. Looking forward to your next episode, Scott Lloyd from South Carolina. Well, Scott, all I can say is thank you. And is it time for school to start already? I've had a number of folks reach out this last week to tell me that the show format is pretty good. In fact, Anthony had this to say. Hey, bud, love that you read the disgruntled letters. I listen to a ton of podcasts and have been a talk radiophile since I was a child. You are a gem. Thursday is Podcast Candy Day when I can download the latest episode. Thank you for giving me a break from my everyday. Anthony Stangert. Thank you, Anthony. And one more from Jeff. I am very grateful to your awesome stories. I have one or two that I would like to tell you. Let me organize the one that happened to me in Awali, Barang during Desert Storm on one oddly rainy eve. I love dang near everything about your show, plus you got some kind of chill voice that relaxes me. Thanks, Ron. Jeff Fuller. Very cool, Jeff, and thank you for your service. I look forward to reading your story. Now, I don't plan to read every email and notification I get on the show, and to those of you that sent me comments that I didn't read, I appreciate every single one I get. It makes me happy to get both good and bad critique because that means that you cared enough to let me know. So, thank you one and all. One update this week. I want to remind you that we are quickly approaching the 9th annual month of Spooky. This year is shaping up to be pretty special. It will begin with our 400th episode. This will be a celebration and will feature 4 UFO stories sent in by you guys. It's also going to be co-hosted by podcast lord Jim Harold. Now, I do have a request. I need lots of scary stories for that month. So if you have something of a ghostly, monsterly, or whatever nature, please send it to me. I really need them. And now, this word from Audible. Today's podcast is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook and a 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/Ron's Amazing Stories. They have over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, computer, Kindle, Whatever you have, you can listen to Audible on it. So, what am I listening to right now? Have you ever heard of the Terry Brooks Shannara series? These are amazing fantasy novels at their best and are a must-listen to. It begins with The Sword of Shannara in 1977 and continues through to The Scar Invasion, which was released in June of 2018. The series blends magic and primitive technology. The setting is the Four Lands, which are identified as Earth long after civilization was destroyed by the Great Wars. The Sword of Shannara is the first volume of this classic series that has become one of the most popular-selling fantasy series of all time. Long ago, the wars of ancient evil ruined the world. In peaceful Shady Vale, half-elven Shay Olmsford knows little of such troubles. However, what Shay doesn't know is that he is the last hope of all the known races. You can begin the enthralling Shannara epic today. Here's what Audible has set up for us. Audible is offering a free audiobook and 30 days to give you the opportunity to check out their service. To download your free audiobook, go to audibletrial.com/Ron's Amazing Stories. Again, that's audibletrial.com/Ron's Amazing Stories, and you can get started on the adventure of a lifetime. Thank you, Audible. And now, it's time for your stories.
These are your stories, sent by you, for you.
Our first story comes from Andrew Brazier, who writes to us from Marble Falls, Texas. From what I gather from Andrew, Marble Falls is about 100 miles north of San Antonio. Originally, Andrew sent this story in, but it got lost in the shuffle somewhere. But today, it is found, and this one is a head-scratcher we call My Day at LBJ. Hello, Ron. I am a Texas native, and I've never been out of the state my whole life. I was born here, went to school here, graduated from college, met my wife, and had 2 great kids, all right here in the Lone Star State. If you haven't figured it out, I am a proud Texican. My story isn't all that scary, but it defies any explanation. At least I could never find one, and it all begins in June of 1984. I woke up that morning with the idea of heading out for a day of kayaking at LBJ with a group of friends. For those who don't know, LBJ is the nickname for Lyndon B. Johnson National Park. It is a wonderful resort town with fun things to do all year around. We packed up the pickup truck, and the 4 of us, my wife-to-be Mary, John, and Michelle, all headed out to the lake. We had a wonderful day full of swimming, spirited water fights, a picnic lunch, and, of course, competitive kayak races. It was getting on towards evening, and we were planning to stop at our favorite bar, the Hiccup Sports Grill, on the way home. So we packed everything up and started out. There is a lonely stretch of road on Route 2147 between LBJ and town. We were about a mile or 2 in when we see a young woman along the side of the road. She waved us down and approached the car. She was dressed oddly. Looking back on it now, I would have to say that it was 1950s style of clothing. My wife Mary says that it was a light sweater with checkered cigarette pants. She looked quite upset and said that she'd been waiting for help for almost an hour. She went on to say that her boyfriend had crashed his truck just off the road and was trapped inside. He wasn't hurt badly, but she wasn't so sure. It was decided that Mary and I would go with her and that John and Michelle would go for help. We got out of the truck to follow her to the accident site. Then we both turned to wave at John as he drove off. When we looked back, the distressed young woman was gone. We looked around for quite a while before finally giving up. About 20 minutes later, John and Michelle returned with a state patrolman. We told him our story, and he didn't seem all that surprised. He didn't even accuse us of lying or drinking. When I asked him why, he simply said that this is not the first time this has happened. There was no internet at that time to look things up, so it wasn't until recently that I finally got around to looking into it. Unfortunately, it came up empty. There are certainly a lot of strange stories that have been reported in that area, but nothing to support what happened to us that summer of 1984. So you'll have to decide for yourself if you believe my story. Like I said at the top, it defies all explanation. But it did happen. Andrew Brazier, Marble Falls, Texas. Well, Andrew, who am I to doubt? It certainly is a head-scratcher for sure. If I had to guess, I would go with time shift. For a brief moment in time, you and this young woman shared experiences. I did send Andrew a question. Did she react to your truck being different? He said, no, but why would she? At the time, I was driving a vintage 1950 F4 flatbed pickup that my dad and I had restored ourselves. Crazy coincidence? I don't think so. Thank you for your tale, Andrew. This next story comes from returning listener Stella Bennett, who writes to us from Los Angeles, California. Stella's last story was read in episode number 349, Ghost Stories with Sylvia, Volume 4, which aired on October 9th, 2018. Stella has titled her story, Living with Loss, and it has appeared in several locations across the internet. I'll always remember the day my husband died. It was the worst day of my life. He was admitted to hospice for 2 weeks, but hung on for 3. I didn't leave his side for a single second so I could be there for those last moments. Returning home was devastating. The place was a wreck. Trash everywhere, food rotting in the kitchen. I'd spent so long looking after Renee that I had let the house go. Cleaning was cathartic. It felt good to lose myself into scrubbing dishes, vacuuming, and restocking the fridge. As I cleaned room after room, the fits of depression and aimless wandering came less often. There were still moments where I'd blink, confused as to why I was in a different room or how I even got there. But they were becoming fewer and farther between. So when odd things started happening, I assumed it was due to my blank spells. A sandwich I'd been saving gone, a book I set aside moved to another table. But there were other things too, like strange noises at night. It sounds foolish, but what if it was Renee reaching out from the other side? I even bought a Ouija board, but received no answer. I tried again, this time placing cameras around the house, hoping to capture something. I spent hours calling out to Renee, begging for a sign, but to no avail. Heartbroken, I cried myself to sleep almost every night. Weeks later, an alert informed me that my computer's memory was full. I'd forgotten to shut the darn cameras off. Annoyed, I went to the bedroom to where the computer was. Sure enough, there were weeks of footage from every room in the house. I clicked open the first available recording. It showed me wandering around the living room. I clicked on the night of my amateur seance. Just hours of me talking to myself. No supernatural occurrences, no messages from beyond the grave, just a lonely old woman who didn't know how to let go. Then, movement on the screen caught my eye. I checked the tape. 4:22 a.m. I was in bed on camera, but there was a shadow moving towards the kitchen. My heart stopped. A filthy, ragged woman opened the fridge and began hungrily shoveling food down. I watched as she snuck back upstairs, retreating into a closet, sliding the panel back to the attic into place behind her. The footage was from that very morning. Nervously, I checked other recordings. Every couple days, the woman emerged, stole some food, then crept back into the closet. Wednesday night, Friday night, last night, I swallowed. I watched her root around the kitchen, then disappeared into her hiding spot. Going back to that morning, I checked the timestamp. 6:30 a.m. It was now 8:12 a.m. I went to the room where the closet was. It was slightly ajar, and there were a set of eyes peering out at me. I told her to come out, and we talked for hours. She was completely homeless, had no family, and had been living in my attic for several weeks. Also, she was on the run from her abusive husband. We are now good friends. She is living in a local women's shelter, and we get together for lunch once a week. She is taking some night classes at a local college and hopes to be back on her feet soon. I can't say how much Susan has helped me. While I miss my husband deeply, I do now feel like I have a purpose in life. I volunteer at the shelter and helped battered women get the support they need. Thank you for letting me tell you my story. I know it isn't paranormal, but it is amazing, don't you think? Stella Bennett, Los Angeles, California. Well, Stella, I do think it's amazing, and let me say how sorry I am for your loss. I can't imagine how that must have felt. Also, your support of Susan was amazing, and I think it shows the type of person you really are. Thank you for your story, and thank you for being there for others. God bless you. Our last story comes from Sean Roberts from Parts Unknown. Hello, Ron. I love your show and listen every weekend. I am now 16 years old, and I have a short story for you. It happened when I was 8, and occasionally still happens from time to time. I have no explanation, and I call this The Devil Was Up There. One day, and I emphasize day, as in bright and early, my mom told me to get my older brother from his room on the 3rd floor for breakfast. I walked halfway up the stairs and looked to my right at the 3rd floor hallway. I froze. There was a shadow on the wall, a shadow that had no business being there because the window was directly in front of me and the angles were all wrong. It was human-like, but also grotesquely not. It had shaggy, curly hair, horns, and legs that bent forward like a goat. I swear it looked right at me. I noped out of there, and despite my mother yelling at me, I insisted the devil was up there, and I was not going to get my brother today. She told my dad about this. She thought he'd get a laugh out of it. He didn't. He turned white as a sheet. He had seen the very same creature a few nights before. Same height, same hair, same eyes staring back at him in the dark. However, in his case, he tried to get a better look, and the creature ran away. Now I live on that same floor where my brother was, and I swear I have dreams where something is at the foot of my bed or something is at the end of the hallway near the stairs. I never see anything clearly, but I get the feeling that something is definitely there. I don't know what it is about the 3rd floor, but everyone who sleeps here has very similar creepy stories. Sean Roberts from Parts Unknown. Wow, Sean, I have no idea what that could be. Thank you for sharing your story, and I hope one day that you and your family are able to figure it out. It doesn't sound malevolent, or at least your story doesn't suggest anything negative, but you'll have to let me know. Thank you all for your stories. Do you have a story that you want to tell on the show? If you do, we want to hear it. It can be about any subject and from any genre. Heck, it doesn't even have to be true. Original fiction or stories from the public domain are quite welcome. To submit them, just head to ronsamazingstories.com and click on the Story Submissions banner. Fill out the form, and soon your story will be heard. Do you have a story but don't want to write it? That's okay too. Just leave your contact information, a brief description of your story, and I'll get back to you. We can write it together. However, if you don't do it, your story remains just that, your story. Why not make it our story? Those were some great stories today, and there are more to follow. But I wanted to take a minute and tell you something fun. I've had a lot of interest from people wanting to read stories on the show, like Cody Appadale, who has already read one for us and is currently working on one. I've also had a lot of folks tell me that you like having me read them. So, what I've decided to do is to use the As Read By segment to showcase these readers and just a few of your stories. If you're interested in taking part, here's what you have to do. First, send me an email with your contact information, type of recording equipment you have, and if possible, include a sample of you reading a short of some sort. Then we can work out the details and get you some stuff to read. The show email address is ronsamazingstories@gmail.com. I think it would be fun to have some of these stories by you read by you. And now, this message from Gladdy's Goodies.
I'm Gladdy, the dachshund, the face of Gladdy's Goodies. Are you worried about your pet's health? My parents were too, especially since I developed pancreatitis. They couldn't find any treats I could eat, so they made some. Our natural treats are healthy for all dogs, with and without health issues. We have lots of delicious flavors like chicken, turkey, salmon, sweet potato, beef, and more. With our homemade treats, you won't worry about the contents because they have no chemicals, fillers, or bad ingredients. Go to GladysGoodies.com now to get your fur friend a bag and pick them up some swag while you're there. You'll be glad you did. Remember, we have the treats and swag to make their tails wag. Again, that's GladysGoodies.com. Again, that's GladysGoodies.com.
Don't forget to use our very own promo code, RONS, to get a 20% discount on all of your purchases. That is RONS. Thank you, Gladdy. I can't say too often how much I appreciate you sending in your stories to me. It's also apparent that you like hearing them as well, so it was on May 3rd, 2018, I created the segment, These Are Your Stories. The response was off the charts. You started sending in more tales and more feedback. What we're going to do today is replay a few of those chart-topping favorites, beginning with this one, which comes from episode 268 and is the most requested story in the history of the podcast. Now, I'm going to play it just as it was back on December 8th, 2016.
As read by. Amazing stories read by amazing people.
This time on As Read By, we have something that I think is pretty special. I received the following email last week. I read it to you now in its entirety, unaltered. Ron, please find 2 attachments to this email. One is a text-only file that tells a story that I promised that I would never tell. The second is an MP3 file, which is the only proof I can offer that what I say is true. I'm not a good writer, and I know that you are. Please edit the text file, if you wish, to fix my poor writing. I'm older now, and I wanted to tell my story. Clear my head, if you will. I give you my permission to use all of this on your show. Please don't try to contact me. The email account I used to send this has been deleted. So that I can contact you in the future, I enclosed a secret word so that you will know it's me. Thank you, 3xstranger@gmail.com. To say that I was taken aback by this would be an understatement. The cloak and dagger thing makes it all kind of cool, though. I wrestled with whether or not I should tell this man's story. However, after reading through it, I decided that even if all of this is a lie, it's still a good tale. I don't ask you to believe it, and for me, I've decided to file it under undecided. I did edit what you're about to hear, but I made sure to maintain the original feel and intent. I will play the attached MP3 file after the story. So, here it is, the adventure which I have called Gigantopithecus. It was to be the hunting trip of the year. We'd been planning it for some time, and the three of us were finally ready. Myself, my friend Mark, and his brother John had everything packed into a 1959 F-100 Ford pickup truck. We had enough food and supply for 2 weeks' worth of hunting, fishing, and camping. The past winter had been rough, so the Fish and Game Department limited the issue of elk tags that year. We only had one for the three of us. It was our plan to make the most of it, and we had picked an area sure to be rich with wildlife. However, it was quite remote and would present us with many challenges. We arrived at our campsite. We quickly set about putting up tents, building food traps, digging a fire pit, and it was our practice to remove a wheel from the truck, hide it and the spare in the woods near camp. We'd had a vehicle stolen some years back and did not want to relive that story. The first 3 days were glorious. We had October fishing for rainbow trout and Dolly Varden, hiking through the countryside, and many other activities to keep us busy. Of course, each day we would head out and search for elk sign. We had not seen anything, and in fact, the wildlife in general seemed to be scarce. We were not worried because we knew the elk were migrating south this time of year, and your fortune would change one day to the next. On the third day, we were out inspecting deer trails when a hush fell over the area. It was hard to describe. It was like the entire forest stopped and was holding its breath. This lasted for several minutes, and as fast as it came, things returned to normal. John was the first to say, "Well, that was creepy." To which I replied, "Yeah, let's get back to camp." We had left Mark alone there to cook the evening meal, and it was getting late in the day. When we arrived at camp, Mark was nowhere to be found. The dinner, consisting of fresh trout, beans, and cornbread, was set on the fire pit. The aroma was nothing short of breathtaking. Hiking through the hills had left us tired and hungry, and both of us felt the call of that campfire's treat. It would have to wait, though, because the forest silence was broken with a scream that could have only come from Mark. At first, it seemed to be coming from everywhere, but eventually we determined a direction and ran through the forest. We found our friend slumped over a fallen tree, unconscious, but he appeared to be uninjured. We helped him back to camp and was able to rouse him. When he came to, his eyes went wide with fear, and he asked, "Did you see it?" "See what?" his brother asked. "The beast, as big as a grizzly, but man-like. A gorilla, maybe. I don't know. It was right there in my face. I screamed and he, left, I guess." Mark was terrified. But in the end, we all agreed that it had to be a grizzly, and he was lucky to be alive. That would also explain the lack of wildlife in the area. We finished our dinner and cleaned up. We took extra care to get the rest of our groceries safely protected, high up in the trees in the food traps. Also that night, we decided to have a guard on duty to watch things. We broke up the assignment into 3 parts, and I took the middle watch. I was about halfway through my watch when the sounds began. I awoke Mark and John. Together, we heard a series of yells and grunts. The series would run for about 4 to 5 minutes, stop, and then start again. It was terrifying to listen to, and it went on for what seemed to us to be hours. At one point, I went to the truck and got my tape recorder and made a record of it. The 3 of us spent the rest of the night huddled around the campfire, eventually falling into an uneasy sleep. I would hear those shrieks in my dreams for many years to come. The next morning, the area was calm. The forest seemed to have returned to normal, and it was peaceful. Mike pointed out that he didn't remember things feeling like this any of the 3 previous days. I think he was right about that. We were just starting to move around camp when I heard John let out a gasp. I turned to my friend and said, "What is it, John?" He just stood there, pointing at the pickup and shaking his head slowly. I looked over and could not believe my eyes. Both tires to the pickup were leaning against the back gate. On the gate itself was a very dead bull elk. Well, we packed up quickly, loaded everything into the pickup, including the elk meat, its pelt, and horns. The rest of it we buried in the fire pit. We decided to end our vacation early that year, and we took the meat to the butcher's. We never talked about that trip again, decreeing that it was our secret. John took the horns, and we all split up the meat, and I still have the recording I made that night. What was it? Who was it? Hairy apes, Bigfoot, Sasquatch? All I will say is I feel a burden lifted by sharing my story with you and Ron's Amazing Stories. All I can say is, holy cow, that is a story. I have so many questions, and I have to say I'm a bit frustrated that I can't ask any of them. I've heard quite a few cryptid stories, but nothing like this. I do know that the events must have taken place in the Northwest, perhaps as far north as Alaska. I do, though, want to thank you for sharing your story with us. One last thing on this one. 3Act Stranger did send along an MP3 file. I assume this is the recording he made that day. I will warn you before I play it. It's rather creepy, but it does add some credibility to this whole thing. Let's listen. Pretty creepy, and I don't think I would have stayed the night if that was going on. Again, thank you for sharing your story with us. And now this. This next story aired on May 17th, 2018, just over a year ago. Again, I play it for you just as it aired. Our second story also comes from a museum. this time from Santa Fe, New Mexico, and was sent in via email by Richard. On this one, I did some additional research that should make you say, wow. But first, I will read Richard's story. He writes, "Hello, Ron. I know how you love stories from New Mexico. I'm a longtime resident and have had my share of strange happenings. If you want, I'll share more of them with the podcast. I do love the show, and I wanted to contribute this one. I am a handyman by trade and was hired to make some repairs on a home in Santa Fe. I arrived on a Monday to find out that it was actually a gallery of some sort, the Andrew Smith Gallery. It's open only on weekends, so I had the house to myself as I worked. I was to repair a staircase banister that no one seemed to know how it got broken. I was on the second day of work when I heard a loud crash from right behind me. I turned, and there was nothing there. Everything was in perfect order and could not have made any sort of noise. I went around the house looking for the source and came up empty. The entire time I wandered around the home, I felt as if I was being watched. I finished up the work for that day and spoke to the curator that had hired me. She told me that I had met the ghost resident of the home. They call him Andy Jr. I found out later that the house was known to be haunted by a little boy who had died there, falling from the banister. That's my story, and thank you for letting me tell it. Richard." Well, Richard, that is an amazing story. I did some research, and I found this on the Santa Fe tourism site, Author Unknown. Just a few steps off the Santa Fe Historic Plaza sits the Andrew Smith Gallery. The house was originally built in 1905 by a couple that was new to Santa Fe. Unfortunately for the young couple, after they built their new home, a sickly son was born who required constant attention. To make matters worse, the woman's husband died shortly thereafter. The young mother soon remarried. Over the years, the child's health continued to get worse, and the mother threw herself into caring for the young boy. Visitors to the home heard the young boy crying and banging on the walls of his upstairs room while his mother was downstairs visiting. Confined to a wheelchair, the boy was said to have rolled too close to the stairway, tumbling down, wheelchair and all, to the landing below. The child finally died of his ailments, and the couple moved away. Afterwards, when the house was empty, neighbors would often report seeing lights in the upstairs room that had belonged to the boy. Today, the house has been converted into the Andrew Smith Gallery. How about that for some collaboration to your story, Richard? I want to thank the official Santa Fe website for providing that information. You can visit their website at www.santafe.org. Also, there you will find more strange stories about the city. To Richard, I say, thank you, sir. I get a lot of emails from truckers who like the podcast. However, unlike most of my commenters, the trucking community as a whole are the only people who think that the podcast is too short. I wonder why. Anyway, this is one of my favorite stories that was sent in by a long-distance trucker. It aired on November 1st, 2018. Our story is a scary one from Christopher Evans in Newport. I don't know for sure which Newport Christopher is from because, well, there's so many. But if I had to guess, I would go with New York. Christopher writes, "Hey Ron, thank you for the opportunity to share my strange story. I am a long-distance trucker and I've been doing this for about 15 years now. I drive the really big rigs. Because of the size of the trucks, most of my work is done at night. I used to pick up hitchhikers to help pass the time on the lonely roads. Now I listen to podcasts like yours to do the same thing. Why? No more hitchhikers, and here is my story. I was taking a load from New York to Santa Fe. This was a long trip, even for me. I was on a lonely stretch of road somewhere in Oklahoma on Highway 44 when I spotted a hitchhiker. He wasn't asking for a ride, he was just walking along the side of the road, but I was pretty bored, so I decided to stop and pick the guy up. I pulled over and waited for him to catch up. He came along the side of the truck and looked up at me. I rolled down the window and asked if he needed a ride. He gladly accepted, ran around the front of the truck, and hopped in on the other side. The first thing I noticed about him as he got in was that he was clean. Very rare for hitchhikers this far from nowhere. We had gotten about 15 miles, and I was regretting having him along because he was as silent as a church mouse. Absolutely nothing came out of him, and he didn't answer any of the questions I asked. I was about to tell him, well, this is as far as I go, when he finally spoke up. "Where are you going anyway?" he said. I decided not to tell him I was on my way to Santa Fe, so I told him that I would be going as far as Elk City, Oklahoma. I remembered just seeing that city on a road sign a few miles back. He replied, "Oh, I better get started then. That's just a few miles away." At that moment, a chill went through my body like I'd never felt before. I literally felt like I was in danger and needed to do something fast, so I said, "What do you need to do?" "Just you never mind. Keep driving, and you'll find out." His voice had changed, and it sounded evil. "I'll have no funny business," I said. "This is not my first rodeo, and you don't want to mess with me." He became quiet again, but I could hear him moving around nervously in his seat. It was then I heard the crack. I don't know how else to describe it. It wasn't like a weapon click or anything like that. It was like bone breaking. I looked over at the man to see what the noise was, and what I saw terrified me. His physical form was changing. I slammed on the brakes, managed to get it over to the side of the road, opened the door, and ran. All the while, I felt like I was being chased, until I didn't. I was about 50 feet away from the truck when I glanced back, and there was no one there. Feeling kind of stupid, I walked back to the truck and looked in the cab. The man was gone. I wish there was more to this story. I looked around a bit and couldn't find him. I looked in the truck and nothing was missing or out of place. I thoroughly searched the sleeper and found nothing out of the ordinary there either. I started up the truck and drove to the nearest bar I could find, and to this day, I no longer pick up hitchhikers. Christopher Evans, Newport, New York. Our last story comes from the very same fellow that sent in a comment earlier in the show, Anthony Stangert. His story goes beyond creepy and was a classic the moment it first aired on November 15th, 2018. In 2001, I was visiting a girlfriend in Monterey Bay. Karen and I decided to visit an art museum where they were presenting the works of the famous photographer Ansel Adams. The photos were from his historic venture into Yosemite National Park. His art simply took our breath away, especially when you consider the pictures were taken in 1927. At that time, I was a free spirit, and I convinced Karen that we should just go there and see for ourselves. Yosemite is about 160 miles away, and we arrived at the park at dusk. There was not much available for lodging, but we did find this crappy motel about 20 minutes outside the park. The area had a few businesses, motels, a couple restaurants, a liquor store, and a gas station. All the buildings were separate and freestanding. However, I could not see a single residence. It was very odd for me, having been raised in Washington, D.C. It felt odd that there were no residents around. The motel was a drive-up to the door type and was very outdated. Two things stood out in my memory: the floor model TV that was still in black and white, and the strange bathroom that had cedar outdoor siding surrounding the tub. There was one other thing, and that is just how creepy the whole place was. At first, the novelty of it all was fun. But then at 2 o'clock in the morning, we were fleeing our room. We had just finished setting up for the night and decided to head out for dinner and drinks. It was a small town, no more than 50 people, but there were places open. We ate dinner, had some fun, but wanted to be ready for a full day of exploring the park, so we headed back to the motel early. Back at the motel, we both had issues falling asleep, even though we were exhausted from the trip. I turned on the old black and white TV to find a classic episode of Kojak playing. Finally, at around 11, we dozed off. At precisely 2 a.m., the both of us woke up, sat up in bed in terror and pain. Neither one of us was clear on what had just occurred, but we knew we had to leave, and leave now. We grabbed our stuff, shot out of the room, and headed to the car. The motel office was closed, so I threw the keys at the door as we left. About a half an hour later, we were parked at the Yosemite sign in a little pull-off. We then both described the same experience. A very angry, short man with long gray hair and even longer beard was yelling about some woman. He was dressed in dungy overalls and had no shoes. He somehow subdued us and put his hand into the center of our backs while we slept. This felt like a possession. It was so painful that we both could still feel it even after we left the motel. Karen was not in my dream, and I wasn't in hers. The physical pain lasted about 15 minutes for both of us. To this day, I'm not sure what we experienced, but I do know I will never go back. We slept in the car at that pull-off until the first bit of light woke us up. Sleep-deprived and blurry-eyed, we made our way home. I remember driving past one of the cliffs we saw in the museum. Our perspective was much different than that of Ansel Adams. From our view, we were mostly just under it, but we were satisfied, and our goal was achieved. At the first bit of civilization, we got a room at a real hotel. Let's say Holiday Inn. We grabbed a six-pack, some fast food, and watched a color television. We went to sleep early that night, but sleep for us was messed up for a couple days. We got up early and drove to San Francisco for a full day of tourist stuff. I've attached a picture that was taken just after our nap at that little pull-up near Yosemite National Park. Sorry, it is a picture of a picture. Anthony Stangert, California. What an amazing story, Tony. So freaky, and it sent chills down my spine. I have no idea how you must have felt and how you dealt with it all. You said in your last note that this story was cathartic for you. I'm happy for that, but I'm left with so many questions. Also, you said you had more stories. Please do send them in. We want to hear them. Well, there you have some of the best stories we've ever had. It certainly isn't all of them. In fact, to date, there are over 150 stories in the Ron's Amazing Stories archives. My hope for today is that I didn't overtax you with too many stories, if that's even possible. Well, that was a whole lot of stories. Next week, we will return to our normal programming. My thanks to Scott Lloyd, Anthony Stangert, Jeff Fuller, Andrew Brazier, Stella Bennett, and Sean Roberts for helping out today. You guys are amazing. If you want to follow the podcast or the blog, just head to ronsamazingstories.com. There you'll find an amazing number of links that should fit every need. Do you want to help the show? The best thing you can do is tell your friends about it. And please leave reviews or feedback wherever you listen. This helps us to grow. Thank you for listening, and I hope you come again to find out what are Ron's Amazing Stories.
All of the vintage audio used in the podcast is believed to be in the public domain. Ron's Amazing Stories does not own the rights to any of the old-time radio used here. If you hold the rights to any of the shows played, please contact us immediately at ronsamazingstories.com.